this from the drawings and the specs. And manufacturing attributes, this actually you can find from the process plans, like major process, minor, major dimension, length diameter ratio, surface finish, machine 2, operation sequence, production time, batch size, annual production, fixtures, cutting tools. And you may find that some of these items actually are overlapping. You see surface finish, and you see surface finish at top, because they can be treated as both design attributes as well as manufacturing attributes. Okay. So you can, for each part, you can find these are generally the set information available in the archive, in the materials you dig out. Okay, and then you decide what are those you want to include, and that normally will decide the number of attributes. Number of digits. Okay, and the more, of course, the more attributes you choose, the longer the code could be. Okay, these are the important, the second part, details. And the third one is the so-called the code structure. The code structure. Code structure may be slightly new, okay? But after I show you the example, you may feel that it's not something, very well, actually quite used to this kind of expression. The first one is, although I put it in the slides, the second type, the coding structure, we call it chain structure. The meaning is very straightforward. Let's say I have a 4-digit code, and if the value is 1, 2, 3, 4, the code is 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, and the interpretation is very straightforward. The first digit 1 represents a fixed meaning. Second digit 2, value 2 refers to a fixed meaning. 3, the third one, 3 for fixed meaning, and so on. So for each digit, the meaning it represents fixed. It got nothing to do. There's no relationship between the neighboring digits or whatever. We call this as a chain structure. The illustration this is like this. For example, in this example, it's a 4-digit code. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the first one refers to external sheet, second one internal sheet, third one is host. And 1, 2, 3 are the possible values for each digit. And you can see that for digit number 3, value 1 refers to there are axial holes on the component, always. Regardless what are the values of the first, second, and fourth, and so on. So this kind of structure is very much easy to manage, easy to define, easy to so-called interpret. Because a code eventually you can once you define a coding structure, then you can interpret it quite easily. Okay, so this is the chain structure. In contrast, there is another structure we call it like hierarchical, okay, trees, like a tree with the branches. Well, in this one, in this kind of structure, the meaning for a particular digit with a particular value is not fixed. It depends on its preceding digit. The example I'm showing is here. Okay, this is also a 4-digit. The meaning, actually, we only show the meaning of the last 2 digits, x, 3, 2, don't care, okay, x. Let's look at the last 2, let's see the last one. The last digit, okay, the last digit, if it's 3, okay, you can see this is 3, right? This one also 3, right? The last digit. Which means that the last digit with the value 3 could have different meanings. Here, it means receiving. It's like an antenna, actually, electronic device. And these 3 fourth digits represent UNC thread, which is a mechanical part. It has thread, UNC type. So in this kind of, the reason is because its preceding digit to the value, this is 3. This is 2. 2 means it's mechanical type. 3 means it's electrical. So which means that in this kind of a structure, so-called hierarchical structure, okay, same digit, same value can represent different meanings, right? Depending on its preceding. And we call this hierarchical, okay? And the definition, hierarchical interpretation of each succeeding symbol depends on the value of the preceding symbol. That's the characteristic for hierarchical. And it's also called a monocode. Chain structure means every digit in the code position represents a distinct bit of information. We also call this as a polycode. Which one to use? Okay. But each one would have its pros and cons, right? For the first one, hierarchical, for the same number of digits, it represents a much larger amount of information than chain structure, certainly, right? Because same digit, same value could represent different meanings. And this one only represents a fixed meaning. So apparently, if using the same number of digits, the top one could represent more information, certainly. But the drawback is difficult to develop because of all the branches in the hierarchy that must be defined very carefully. Okay. Of course. And chain structure, okay. Disadvantage is a less amount of information with the same number of digits, right? But advantage is it's easy to construct, easy to use. So it's really up to you. And in some cases, actually, people are using hybrid, combining these two, hybrid. In this case, you see the first three digits actually, the number of rows represent the possible values for each digit. So the first 3 are chain structure usually. Last 3 also chain structure. In the middle, make use of so-called hierarchical structure. It really depends. Okay. So that is point number 3 we need to take care of in this development of your own coding system. So first define population, then the detail of code should represent, which means the attributes you want to cover, you define, and then code structure you want to use, and finally, for each digit, the value range. Depending on how many alternatives or fine the information you want to represent. And if you want to represent a very fine bit of information, close to real value, okay, also still, although still very discrete, and you could use a very large number of so-called, large number of possible values. If you only have very limited alternative, then you could prefer, well, if you only 2 alternatives, you use binary. Octo, you could use, 8 decimal, 0 to 9, you have 10 differences. Either numerical or whatever. You could use up to A to Z, like 26, and plus 0 to 9, 10, you got 36, and so on. Okay, it's really up to you to define the value range for each digit. And after that, then the coding system is developed. Okay, the coding system is developed. And after a coding scheme or coding system is developed, and then you want to do some verifications to see whether it's valid or not, the coding system. And these 2 are very important. The first one is, if you look at the population, the parts you want to be covered by this coding system, you have to make sure that every part can be represented by a code. which means you can code that part. Okay. That's the first requirement. And second one part can only have one code. You're not, undecisive. For a certain digit, you don't know which is which. That's not right. So that's the first requirement. A part must be represented by one code and one code only. Okay. So that's the first thing. But at the same time, it is possible, before we look at this, whether this is true, it is possible that several parts share one code. I put a question mark there. True or not? True, right? Yeah. Because no matter how long a code is, no matter how many possible values for each digit could have, the information represented by a code still cannot be compared with its own drawing. Its own drawing definitely 100%, right? And once you represent it using a simple code, no matter how long it is, all right, and it still is kind of discrete in that way. It's abstract of the original set of information. So that's why it's possible that more than one part share the same code. But at the same time, another question here is, but it is desirable that several parts share one code. Is it true or not? And why is that? What if you end up with a coding system and you end up with, let's say you have 10,000 parts, you end up with 10,000 different codes. If that is the case, and your coding system would come to lead to a failure, right? 10,000 different parts, 10,000 different code. Why not use its own drawings? There's no part families, right? Okay. The key is what we want is, okay, similar parts definitely going to have the same code. And then we can apply this so-called concept of group technology for subsequent applications. So that is the key. You can't have a system, eventually it gives you still different parts, no matter how close they are. It's still a different code. No, we don't want that. All right. Unlike those coding systems used in other industry, for example, in supermarket, different products definitely different code. Otherwise, they have a different price, right? So you scan them, you give you the same price. So that's for sure. Okay. Here is what we want is for similar part we want to have the same code. And then the subsequent family identification will become much easier, correct? Much easier. Because we simply see, okay, under this code you got 10, 20 parts, so these belong to the same part family. So that, eventually, that's the design intention when we develop such a coding system. So that's a development process. And fortunately, nowadays, even you've been assigned a task by looking at using a coding system to conduct this kind of tasks, family identification, your job, your career, and there is no need to develop our own coding system nowadays. And there are those commercially available coding systems, and also those free of charge. For example, those developed by research institutions, universities, they simply publish the whole things for you to use to try. And one of the systems which is called the OPIS system. And this system was quite famous at that time when GT was pretty hot research topic as well. It was developed in 1970 and in the University of Aachen Technological University, former West Germany at that time, right? Germany was reunited, I think, 1991, sometime around that. But anyway, so this is the coding system was named after this developed, the professor there. Okay, and this code uses hybrid structure. but only the first digit. Only the first digit. The rest all chain structure. Okay. And the code can be used actually in a very flexible way. The reason is, in total it has 13 digits, but partitioned into three sections. The first 5, D1 to D5, actually called form code. The information really design attributes, okay, belong to design attributes, and describe the primary design attributes of the part. And the second 4, 6 to 9, constitute the which is called a supplementary code. Indicates some of the attributes that would be of use to manufacturing, like dimensions, what material, stock, raw, what piece, shape, and accuracy, and so on. So that's the next 4. And the final 4 are referred to as secondary code. And I intended to identify the production operation type and the sequence. So that this one is typically manufacturing related. This one mainly manufacturing related as well. But the first 5 are those used for representing the design attributes. Okay, so in total, you could use all of them. Or if you want to, you can use section by section. For example, the first 5, if you want to base for design application, you can try the first 5. Okay, and with such a coding system, 13 digits. Each digit would have a range of values. So the representation, the type of attributes, and the representation of it constitute actually a very thick handbook. So if you want to use such a system, you have to get that handbook. You refer to examples when you code your part. But certainly within the scope of this lecture, we're not going to cover, learn how to use such a system. We just want to show that, have a taste, how a part can be coded in a way. And we focus on the first 5 digits. Okay. The first 5 digits. Now, before we look at the so-called details, a value for a digit, a specific value for a digit represent what? Before we look at that, let's look at the structure. First 5 digit. Forget about this. Forget about this. And as I mentioned, the first digit uses hierarchical structure, which means the interpretation of the subsequent digits actually depends on the value of the first one. Okay. And why we call it hierarchical? If you look at this, the value from 0 is decimal from 0 to 9. Okay, and the partition line for the value is here. Okay, 0 to 5 belong to what? Rotational parts. And the 6 to 8, 6 to 9, non-rotational. A rotational part, why normally the classification actually is based on rotation, non-rotation? Because in machining, rotational parts normally can be finished by using a lathe machine. While non-rotational, there are many different kinds of box type, prismatic, many sheet metal or whatever. There are so many different types of non-rotational. Normally, you need a milling machine to finish, to start with. So that's why normally we split them into rotational and non-rotational. Okay? So subsequently, the check, if the first one belongs to 0 to 5, then the interpretation of this subsequent digits actually refer to rotation. Second one refers to external, third one refers to internal, fourth one machine, and so on. So in the subsequently, we forget about this. For non-rotational, the meaning of that will not be covered. We only focus on rotational in the following page. Okay. If if you print out 2 pages in two slices in a single page, you might end up you couldn't see it clearly. Okay. Last year there was an exam question, although a few marks, is regarding that. And I remember some students, all of them brought their materials there, the printed material there. And some students actually they have 4 slides on the page, and they're having trouble because they can't read. Okay, so all right, you need to have something reasonably large, readable. Anyway, so this page only covers for rotational parts, the first 5 digits. 6 to 9 not covered, the value. And for the first digit, if it's a rotation, let's say it's a rotational, okay, there are three values there, 0, 1, 2. It actually stands for what? Stands for L/D ratio. L refers to as the overall length of the rotational part, overall. And D, capital D, refers to the largest diameter. Largest. Okay? Largest diameter. So you do a calculation. Okay? And if it's less than 0.5, then it's 0. Between 0.5 and 3 is 1, and larger than 3 is 2. So that you can do. And digit 2 refers to the so-called external sheet. For rotational parts, the features are actually classified into external and internal. Internal, which means the whole. Let me see. I'll show you the example in this final example. Right? Okay, rotational parts refer to the external sheet, external. And this represents the internal. Of course, it's possible it's solid. There's no internal geometry. Okay? And the central hole, this hole can also be drilled on the lathe. But later you will see, but not these holes. These holes actually, if the axis is not in line with the main axis of the rotational part, it cannot be drilled on the lathe. Okay? So this is the external internal. So the second digit describes this external geometry. The third digit describes the internal geometry. And the meaning, I only go for some simple ones. The first few. If you go to digit 2, if the first one, 0, means smooth, no ship elements, meaning that with a single diameter, nothing else. Smooth. Single diameter. And if the diameters, okay, a rotational part could contain several sections. Each section decides by a diameter. All right? And for example, again, let's refer to our example here. Okay? For this particular example, we have 2 sections. 2 sections represented by their main diameter. So this is one section, this is one section. Okay. So this is a so-called step from one end to the other. Okay. It could be, let's say, from left to right. It could be diameter getting larger, or getting smaller. So this one is from left to right, getting larger. We call this step to an end. And there are other types, step to both ends. So you could have diameter on both ends like this, and towards the middle is getting smaller. And that's we call it step to both. Or in the middle is the largest, and the step getting smaller towards 2 ends. And we call that step to both ends. And both these types are covered here. So if you step to one end, there are further three divisions, further 3 types. The first one is no ship elements. So the ship elements, which means you could have a thread, right? You could have a functional groove. Or you could have even gear teeth, which means there's nothing. no shape elements is 1, with thread is 2, with functional group is 3. And snap both ends, then you have all the choices. Internally, also similar. Internally, the only difference is if it's 0, which means there's no hole, which means if it's solid, there's no central hole, then it's 0. Other than that, very much similar to correspondence between this and this. Okay? And the things we got 5 minutes. The things I want to show you is digit 4 and digit 5. Digit 4 means plane surface machine. What's the meaning of this? I'll show you this example, and then you can understand. For this kind of part, this is external thread. Right side, left side, there are so-called plane. Okay? How do you produce the user facing operation? That's quite easy. You can produce a smooth, flat surface on both ends. Okay? But what about this? What about this? These planes. And you can't produce this on the lathe, right? So number 4, plane surface machining refers to these kind of faces, plane surfaces. It's possible, these are so-called minor features on rotational parts. And normally to produce this, you need to use this kind of machine. Okay, basically it's a lathe. It's a turning center nowadays. Okay, turning center. This is the main so-called spindle here, tailstock, and there is a milling head. We call this the mill 10 machine. And mill actually, or 10 mill. This milling head actually is a minor. It cannot, be functioning like a real milling machine. It can only conduct some light machining jobs. So you can use this to produce this kind of things, right? You can produce these kind of things. So that's what we call the surface machine requirements. Okay, and certainly on this part, no, there's no surface machine requirements. And digit 5. Finally, digit 5 we call auxiliary holes and gear teeth. Again, I'll show you through this example. Okay. Yeah, it could be the top one. Actually, that's one. Although it's very, the length is very small, it's still a rotational part. And these kind of holes, if a hole on the rotational parts, axis in line with the main axis, we call it internal feature, internal geometry, right? Not auxiliary holes. Auxiliary holes are those holes with their axis not in line with the main axis. For example, these holes, right? And on top, you have 2 types. On the sides, you have those kind of holes. On the top, the 6 surrounding the central hole, these are all auxiliary holes. Why we call them auxiliary holes? Because again, you can't produce these holes using lathe. You have to produce those holes on drilling machine or milling machine. You can't on the lathe, no way. Okay, so we call them auxiliary holes. But there are, even for auxiliary holes, can be further classified into another 2 subgroups. Okay, one are these. And these holes, the axis of these holes actually pointing to the central axis of this, perpendicular to it. And we call this radial, along the radius direction, right? Radial holes. And what about the top one, the 6 holes surrounding the central hole? The axis is actually parallel to the main axis, but not in line, right? And we call those holes axial holes. So there are 2 types, either axial or radial. But are there any other holes you can find on mechanical components? Some slant holes here and there? Normally, no. Okay. we're not talking about all possibilities in terms of geometry. Okay, geometry you can find a lot more, but normally you only have these two types of holes, auxiliary holes. So eventually we'll do that, and after that, then we can go through this example. That's the last slides we have before we do it tomorrow. For this one, first 5 digits. The first digit, you can refer to the table. Okay? You refer to the table with the 5 digits descriptions. You refer to the table actually for this part, certainly rotational part, the length overall 1.2 inches, diameter overall 2.0. So 1.2 over 2, 0.6. 0.6 larger than 0.5, less than 3. So it's 1. Second one, step to one end, no shape elements. Diameter step to one end, either from right to left or left to right. But on the external diameter, there's no thread or whatever, so-called extra elements. So again, it's 1. Internally, yes, there is a hole. Single diameter, smooth. Single diameter refers to smooth. And the value again is 1 for number 3. Plane surface machine? No. On this, right, we do have planes, and these are end planes, end planes, end planes. But all those end planes can be finished on the lathe. So there's no external plane surface machining, so the value is 0. Finally, we have 1, 2, 3, and then there's one more here. Because it's symmetrical, only half is shown here. So we do have, what kind of holes is this? Axial holes. It's axis parallel to this, not radial. So we do have axial holes. But this axial holes, if you go back to the last point, pay attention. If you go back to this. Axial holes for value 1 and 2, both axial holes, but 1 means axial holes but not on pitch circle diameter. 2 means axial holes on pitch circle diameter. So the key difference here is pitch circle diameter. So what is the meaning of pitch circle diameter? Okay. If you look at the top left corner, pitch circle diameter refers to in engineering and in mechanical components. Normally, if you have a pattern hose, and this pattern hose either, if you have 3, then it's 120 degrees apart. If you have 4, 90 degrees, they're distributed evenly, okay, along a so-called diameter, right? In this case, we call this as a pitch circle diameter. But if you only have a 1 odd hole, then there's no such thing as pitch circle diameter. Pitch circle diameter, the example, there are 4 holes, 5 holes here actually. They can be used when you program the NC machines automatically, but if you give that. So for our case is we do have axial holes on pitch circle diameter, which is 2. The value is 2. The last one is 2. So eventually it's 11102, and that is the total. So suppose you have a lot of components, then you can do this. Okay, of course manually you need to do this. And eventually you have a lot of codes. So up to this stage, all the designs, the population of the components you're going to use for identifying part family are actually converted into digital representation already, right? Okay, so that's roughly the end for today. Tomorrow suppose we start from 8.